Now we're going to focus a little more in depth on the talkMS Speakers Bureau and the guidelines for being an ambassador and a representative. The talkMS Speakers Bureau was branded by our Volunteer PR and Marketing Committee several years ago, and we have business cards that use this logo that you can use to solicit speaking engagements. And the branded logo has been very popular because it really helps raise awareness about MS, and it seems to catch people's attention because talking about MS isn't just blah, blah, blah. The other side of the business card talks about the story, people living with MS. And while many ambassadors do not live with the disease, they're all affected by it in one way or another. So their story, your story, is what makes people take notice and become motivated to be part of the movement. The email address on the card goes directly to my email, and so if someone wants to schedule a speaker, they can email at that address, and then we'll send out a request to someone in the area who's trained and provide a speaker to that group. So as an ambassador and talkMS speaker, you're helping to raise awareness about MS and the society. As you're probably aware, MS is not a reportable disease, meaning that when a physician diagnoses someone with MS, they're not required to report that diagnosis to any government agency. So it's difficult to establish an accurate number of people diagnosed with the disease. This hinders our ability to lobby for additional government funding for research. So one way we track diagnosis rates is through registration with the society. Raising the profile of the society and raising awareness about MS and educating people about the resources we provide is a good way to encourage registration. We also want to encourage people to become involved with the MS movement by volunteering or participating in a fundraising event. talkMS speakers make presentations to various groups. You might be asked to go to a Rotary Club or another civic organization. These groups often have speakers make presentations at breakfast, lunch, or dinner meetings of the group. Rotary clubs meet weekly, so they're very receptive to having a talkMS speaker make a presentation. Civitan and Sertoma clubs are service organizations, and we've often been able to recruit volunteers from their membership. School clubs like Key Clubs, which are part of Kiwanis, or National Honor Society. HOSA, which is an organization for people going into the healthcare field, and other organizations often request speakers. And then churches also host wellness fairs and offer good opportunities to educate their members and their staff about MS. And business lunch and learns are also great opportunities to raise awareness. Also be aware that you'll likely be asked to man information tables for such events as community health charities, workplace giving fairs, health fairs, or participate in MS Awareness Week activities. And you're urged to seek out your own opportunities to make presentations, and we'll give you a template letter for that so that you can send that out to any organizations with which you might have contact. Always, if you do get an opportunity to speak, please report it back to the chapter so that we can keep track of all of our contacts within the community. And share with us any connections you might have to groups, churches, or businesses that might like to have a speaker attend an event. Sometimes you'll be asked to write letters to the editor to raise awareness in your area. And certainly we would urge you to seek out ways to tell your story to the media. Small independent newspapers and magazines are very receptive to having people share their stories, and particularly around MS Awareness Week, we would urge you to attempt to share your story with them. Training for talkMS speakers will include annual training opportunities, updated materials, mentoring if you're interested in making a presentation with an experienced speaker or having a staff member work with you. And we'll also reach out annually to organizations in the chapter area and request opportunities to speak. So as a representative of the society, we do have some recommended guidelines we'd like you to follow. You'll receive a copy of these guidelines along with your presentation and materials. We do ask you to abide by our confidentiality policy and to complete a volunteer consent and code of conduct form annually. So our confidentiality policy is really focused on following the best practices to protect the privacy of personal information received from our clients, constituents, employees, volunteers, and donors. And maintaining confidentiality and privacy of personal information is of the utmost importance. Our privacy policy provides guidance to volunteers about how we protect that information. So in summary, we really want to make sure that no information concerning persons affected by multiple sclerosis will be discussed outside the chapter office or with any unauthorized parties. Our mission is to provide services to people with MS and their families, and respecting their right to privacy is essential. It's really important that if you learn that someone has MS, that you make sure that you don't disclose that diagnosis unless that person personally gives you permission. We also ask you to use accurate and considerate language. We try to avoid language that's more negative than it needs to be or makes MS the main aspect of someone. For example, we ask you to say a person with MS instead of MS person or MSer. Or someone who says uses a wheelchair instead of someone who is wheelchair bound. Or instead of handicap, we ask you to say disability. We also want to ask you to be an objective listener. It's easy to share stories about your MS or your family member's MS, but we try to keep these to a minimum. Be sure that your focus is on raising awareness. And again, we'll mention this several times, but whenever you receive a request for advice or questions about medications or symptoms, we'd like to ask you to refer that back to the society. They can contact an MS navigator at 1-800-FIGHT-MS or send an email to the chapter or call the chapter office. Rather than trying to give advice, we urge you to do that. So remember that you're perceived to be the spokesperson for the society. So we'd like to ask you to use discretion in sharing your personal experiences. So if you have MS or a family member has MS and someone asks you about medications, treatments, or therapies, it's up to you how much information you share. But however, please remember that you're perceived to be that spokesperson, so always emphasize that they are your personal experiences. Emphasize that MS is unpredictable and different for everyone, and that we encourage everyone with MS to talk with a doctor before making decisions about treatments. Always the best way to ensure that the questioner gets accurate information or the referral that he or she needs by sending them to our 1-800-FIGHT-MS phone number or the National MS Society. And when answering a question, remember that none of us has all that information about MS. If you're unsure about answering a question, don't just wing it. It's best to direct the questioner to the website or give them the phone number. And then again, I want to emphasize that while you are a volunteer for the National MS Society, you cannot represent another entity or organization. Some volunteers are ambassadors for pharmaceutical companies or for other organizations, and that's a great opportunity for you. But when you are a talkMS speaker or acting as a movement ambassador, you must focus solely on being an ambassador for the National MS Society. So, and you must be as unbiased as possible when you're representing the society. So if you think you might have difficulty with doing that, please give me a call, and I'd be happy to discuss it with you. You're also going to receive a tip sheet for making effective presentations, and we're going to cover a few of those here. Take a few minutes to review the information in the tip sheet. It can be very, very helpful to you. So this is just a checklist that helps you know, okay, this is what I need to do when I'm going to a presentation. Know where I'm going, know what time I'm going to be there, have the name of the contact and the contact's phone number with you, the makeup of the group so that you can tailor your presentation. And when you are given an opportunity to speak to a group, we will connect you with that contact for the group so that you can have this information. Also, really be sure you clarify how long you have to speak and have your material or your talking points with you. Technology. Some people really like using PowerPoint presentations, and we can provide you with a draft presentation. However, you will discover that most groups have limited audio-visual capabilities. And with time constraints, it can be very difficult to set up and use a PowerPoint. We recommend that you use a chapter brochure, and we'll give you copies of those as really your takeaway and as your illustration as you're making your presentation. PowerPoints can be very difficult, and so we just urge you to think about doing that. You can use the PowerPoint for your own notes, and that would probably be a better use. You're also going to receive an updated fact sheet as it becomes available so that you can answer questions more effectively. It's very important that you remember that the focus of your presentation is to raise awareness about MS in the society so that we can connect people to the resources and support we can provide them. While we want to ensure that people understand the impact of MS, we must include all of the following information in a presentation. So we want to make sure you introduce yourself as a representative of the society, that you provide a description of multiple sclerosis, its symptoms, its diagnosis, that it's unpredictable, and that it is the most common neurological disease leading to disability in young adults. While we want you to share your story, make sure that it is comprises only a small part of the presentation. A rule of thumb might be if you have 25 minutes for a presentation, make your story no more than 5 to 7 minutes. The resources provided to you should provide you with all the information you need to make a presentation containing these components. But if you feel you need more information, please contact me or your chapter representative during your follow-up training. Please be sure to include the information shared in the training regarding the National MS Society and the local chapter. You'll be provided with talking points and a draft community presentation to assist you in covering this information. So give that overview of the National MS Society and the chapter area. Use that one-pager and that brochure that we'll provide you for a description of our programs and services and advocacy, and the chapter's signature fundraisers. And then try to engage them, sharing them how they can donate. Donations can be directed to our office in Raleigh, and we'll provide you with that address. And then also provide an overview of volunteer opportunities, and we'll share a one-page overview with that of those with you as well. Chapter brochures are an excellent way to provide the audience a takeaway. They include the national and local website and a phone number for our MS navigators. And by connecting personally with the audience, that's a key way to help people to remember the information you're sharing. And now we're going to cover a little bit about what the presentation should not contain. As I mentioned before, please don't try to advise people on medications and symptoms. MS is different in everyone. So if you do decide to share about your own experiences, please make sure that you emphasize that they are your personal experiences, and that you refer people to the national website and MS Navigator or to their own neurologist. Also, please note that due to privacy and confidentiality, we cannot agree to send information to people who haven't requested it personally. So if someone comes up to you after a presentation and says that their neighbor or relative or a coworker really needs information, don't agree to send it to the neighbor, the coworker, or the relative. Agree to have it sent directly to the person who requested it, and they can pass it along. Also want to urge you to be careful about using any off-color or inappropriate jokes or making any suggestive comments that could be taken offensively. It's also important that representatives refrain from making any partisan political comments or statements about controversial issues. Even if you feel you're just being funny and engaging, some people can take offense. So refrain from making comments that are personal or could be construed as flirting. And respect others' personal space, and do not try to touch anyone other than with a simple handshake. Making an effective presentation. We want to just talk a little bit about that. Making an effective presentation is really important, and as I said, you'll receive some tips, a tip sheet for that. We want to remind you that the goal of the presentation is to raise awareness about MS in the society. So focusing solely on your own story will not provide a full overview of MS and the society. So we want to make sure that you balance sharing your Emmy information about your own story with the information that we've asked you to include about the society and MS. Be yourself. Try not to be stiff as a board or too formal. Connect with the audience. Use your eye contact to make connections. Again, use discretion in sharing personal stories and information. And respect time limits given. Clarify with the contact whether the time that they've given you for the presentation includes question and answer, or is there an additional time for that. You will, or you have already received this copy of our tips for effective presentations, and a few of the important tips are to be engaging, show your personality, use your body language effectively, and avoid mannerisms or tics. You might want to take a small digital recorder with you or record yourself practicing to identify any verbal tics. Ums can be very distracting to people, and so can talking with your hands. I have that problem, and I have to be very careful to make sure that I don't distract people when I am making a presentation. So check out what kind of distractions you might have in your presentation. So we want to create the right presentation. Managing your voice is an important part of making an effective presentation. Nerves can make your voice higher or squeaky, or it can cause you to speak too quickly. So consciously manage your voice. Watch your inflection. When you're nervous, you might find yourself ending sentences as though they're questions. Speak as though you are sure of the information. Articulate. When you're nervous or trying to move through material quickly, you can slur your words, making it difficult for people in the audience to understand you. So just slow down and remember to articulate. Also, don't rush. Pauses can be very effective for emphasis. So don't rush through the presentation, but be very careful to emphasize with a pause and a place where you really want people to listen. So in making a great presentation, you need to know the material. No one wants to hear you reading. So have your notes, but don't be tied to them. Give yourself some written clues on your talking points or your cards. You might put things in different colors. You might put stars next to them. You might use note cards, but I would always make sure that you have very large fonts, because it's easy when you look down to lose your place. Ignore mistakes. People are not going to notice as much as you will. And if it's a minor mistake, just move on or correct yourself if you really feel it's necessary. But do not let it throw you. Practice. Practice before a mirror. Practice before someone who is a relative or a friend. And then time yourself. Make sure you know how long your presentation takes and time it so you don't go too long. Again, relax when you're making this presentation. Remember, the audience wants you to succeed. And watch your posture. If you're at a podium, don't clutch it so that you're terrified, and don't slump. But if you use a cane or you feel uncomfortable, ask if it's possible for you to sit at a table or use a chair. Make sure you tailor the presentation to the particular audience. If it's an audience of professionals, try to use some illustrations that are going to connect with them. If it's young people, pick out some points that are really important to a high school group. Remember that many of these presentations are going to be held in restaurants, and so they're going to be distractions. They're going to be people getting up to get more food, or waiters or waitresses coming in to deliver food. So don't get distracted. Be aware that's going to happen. And don't try to give too much information in a presentation. As I said, tailor it to the time and to the group. And don't worry if you don't get everything out to them. You will have raised awareness. And be sure you leave time for question and answer. As I mentioned, there may be distractions. So you may need to handle some problems with grace. Perhaps someone drops a plate of dishes, or perhaps someone comes in late. Just handle all of those problems with grace. Be funny, make a joke about it. And then at the end, always thank the group for the opportunity and send a thank you note to your contact.